The U.S. and Iran to resume technical talks next week to flesh out detail and determine an implementation of every point in an initial ceasefire agreement so that they can move towards a more lasting deal on peace. Tehran's chief negotiator hailing the Memorandum of Understanding signed a week ago as what he considers a declaration by America of defeat.
تفاهم اسلام آباد نیز نه نتیجه فشار و اجبار بلکه حاصل مقاومت و اقتدار ملت شجاع ایران بود.
But dispute on several points could still unravel any such deal, including who should manage the Strait of Hormuz post-conflict, with control including questions on the charging of tolls. The U.S. president saying Iran has told Washington that no tolls are being sought from ships transiting the strait. Longtime U.S. partner Oman says it's talking to Iran about the Strait of Hormuz. It has opened a temporary maritime corridor to ease congestion as the waterway reopens to transit. Qatar, meanwhile, pushing for a direct U.S.-Iran hotline to help reopen and safeguard the waterway. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has rejected any suggestion that Tehran could impose transit fees. The top U.S. diplomat is on a visit to the Gulf states, seeking to reassure longtime partners who bore the brunt of Iran's missile and drone attacks. And in the UAE, he has renewed Washington's commitment to its security. His trip continues in Kuwait and Bahrain. Uncertainty also over Iran's nuclear program. At this point, the inspection of bombed sites. That of the UN's nuclear watchdog says inspectors will return to those nuclear sites. But Tehran says access to facilities and materials affected during the conflict will only be addressed as part of a final agreement with Washington. Meanwhile, discussions are underway on a U.S.-backed proposal that could see parts of southern Lebanon handed over to the Lebanese army. Tehran has made clear that a lasting end to fighting in Lebanon is just as crucial as ending the conflict with Iran itself. Blake Sifton is standing by in Tel Aviv for CNN Allister D'Souza in Washington, D.C. Blake, let's start with you. This U.S.-backed scheme as this pilot zone in Lebanon, what are the implications if that is reached for a larger deal between the U.S. and Iran?
Good evening, Wei Su. Well, the violence in southern Lebanon has largely subsided since Sunday, but just in the last little while, the Israeli military announced that the Air Force struck two people they said were Hezbollah gunmen in southern Lebanon. That came after the Israeli military killed several people they described as armed Hezbollah militants in the south of Lebanon yesterday. Hezbollah said that they were civilians and that this constituted a violation of the ceasefire. Now, as you say, Iran says that a ceasefire in Lebanon is a prerequisite for any wider permanent peace deal with the U.S. Of this most recent killing, we heard from Iran's ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva. He said Lebanon is an unquestionable part of the agreement, and whatever happens in Lebanon affects the whole process. And he said the U.S. should use all of its leverage against Israel to make it stop its attacks against Lebanon. Now, there are efforts underway to try to prevent violence from spiraling out of control and affecting the entire peace deal. As you say, in direct talks between the Israeli government and Lebanon underway in D.C., there is a pilot program being discussed that would see Israeli forces withdraw from some small areas of the large swaths of areas they've occupied in southern Lebanon, and they would be replaced by soldiers from the Lebanese army. But of course, we need to remember that Hezbollah is not a party to those talks, and they have demanded a full Israeli withdrawal from the south. Now, separately, Qatar and Pakistan have also announced the formation of what's being called a deconfliction cell that would enforce and monitor the ceasefire, and it would be composed of the U.S., Iran, the Lebanese government, and mediators, but crucially not Israel. And that has caused widespread upset here in Israel, with opposition figures accusing the Netanyahu government of handcuffing the Israeli military in southern Lebanon.
All right, Allister, to you now. The U.S. will need support from partners in the Gulf if it wants that deal with Iran to stand. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, 3 states in the Gulf that he's visiting. He's seen the UAE. He's now in Kuwait. He will then head to Bahrain. He has promised continued security guarantees for the UAE. What has been the response so far from these very important partners for the United States?
Yeah, Wei Su, that's the key word there, right? Security guarantees, also reassurances, and there's loads of it really for Rubio to do. We're constantly hearing 2 versions of the interim peace deal. There's this US version and then the Iran version, contradictory claims. So Rubio really has his task cut out for him as he seeks to convince these 3 Gulf allies on the tour that things are really under control. As you mentioned, Rubio has met with the president of the UAE and is now scheduled to travel to Kuwait and Bahrain. Remember, all 3 countries have come under attack by Iranian airstrikes, with some of those resulting in civilian deaths as well. Many of the Gulf countries have been pushing for a peaceful end to the Iran war, right? But the problem is now that we have this interim deal, but not likely the version that these Gulf countries were hoping for. Many are said to be surprised and disappointed by the terms of the MOU. And there are those who see this MOU as just being way too generous for Iran. Take, for example, that proposed $300 billion reconstruction fund, which they fear will not be used for rebuilding destroyed infrastructure in Iran, but instead used to rebuild the military. So Rubio will have to really address this whole issue also about how that fund would be used. There's also the issue of ballistic missiles, which the accord does not address. So in many ways, Gulf countries view these missiles as the immediate threat, even more than a nuclear weapon. So the missiles are here, can be used right now. Now, a week ago, Trump said that it would be unfair for Iran not to have ballistic missiles if other countries have them. So also throwing confusion here into the mix. Then there's the Strait of Hormuz. As Iran indicates, it could be looking at charging fees in the long run. So it's really not going to be an easy sell for Rubio, though just in the last few minutes or so, Trump again reiterating on social media, saying, quote, no tolls, no insurance costs, no other charges of any kind sought by Iran. Remember, Trump has said this before. He's saying this again this morning. Iran, of course, we're hearing, has a different plan, perhaps after the 60-day interim ceasefire ends.
All right, Blake, we're hearing from Allister there. So the many points of difference, and I just name those that he just mentioned. So Strait of Hormuz, missiles, Lebanon, and that rebuilding fund for Iran. Technical talks due to resume between the U.S. and Iran next week, Tuesday. What can they possibly achieve?
Well, as you say, there are major stumbling blocks remaining. To start with, in Lebanon, today we heard from the Israeli Minister of Defense, Israel Katz. He once again repeated the vow that the Israeli military would not pull out of southern Lebanon. In his words, even if there is an American demand to do so. Now, of the thousands and thousands of people who've been displaced from southern Lebanon by the Israeli occupation there, he said 200,000 residents will not return. The infrastructure is destroyed. The houses are ruined. We are not withdrawing. So that could certainly become a major issue if the United States and Iran were to reach a compromise on the Israeli military's positioning in southern Lebanon. Now, ahead of these talks next week, both sides are reporting progress, of course, in the talks that have been held so far. But of course, as you say, there are major sticking points. Iran has constantly and consistently said that they will retain control of the Strait of Hormuz and that they have the right to charge tolls or fees. We heard from Iran's top negotiator. He said Hormuz will never return to the pre-war status quo. But then, of course, we hear from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who says that no country has the right to charge tolls. And as we just heard, President Trump is saying that Iran is not seeking those. So there is a great deal of confusion and a great deal of contradiction. We're hearing from both sides. Today, we heard from Pakistan's foreign ministry spokesperson. They said that a direct line of communication between Iran and the U.S. would be set up to prevent incidents or miscommunications, particularly in the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, thanks for that, Blake Sifton there in Tel Aviv. Of course, as Allister D'Souza mentioned earlier, completely two different understandings of this MOU, both between Iran and the United States. Allister Souza reporting for CNA from Washington, D.C.